Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Holden's 11. We have a great guest tonight, and I can't wait to talk to her. Please welcome author and creator Jessica Maison. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, Timothy. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, this is a fun one tonight. We're going to talk about the classic 50s sci-fi movies. And before we start, there's a couple of rules, right? Like one, it has to be released between 1950 and 1959. The other one I had was that it had to be a black and white film. However, there's one exception. I sort of broke the rule. So let's jump right into that. That's number 11, Forbidden Planet from 1956. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, I love that movie. I actually watched that was one I watched later in life. I didn't watch it as a kid because I watched a lot of the others when I was a kid. And I don't know, the use of color was a lot of fun in it. I love the robot and
Right, the first appearance of Robbie the Robot.
Robbie the robot. Yeah. And then I later, like when I came out here in the early years of my first film experiments, and I produced a low budget movie called Carts, and I got to work with Warren Stevens, who is in Forbidden Planet. And so that was
Sweet.
super, yeah, that was super cool. And I mean, I'm sure he would have rather been in Forbidden Planet than what he was doing with us, but we were having a good time.
That's really terrific. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the robots. We talked about this in the other show also because, man, Robbie the Robot, probably the most iconic robot, certainly at the top of those lists too.
Yeah.
So that's a tough call. We have Forbidden Planet on our list, even though it's technically a color film, but it releases the right year and it's so influential, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was hard not to include it.
Right. It's almost, you almost feel like your list is missing one if you don't have Forbidden Planet.
Yeah. And it's got a great title, Forbidden Planet.
Right. And I was reading in one of the original titles, the rejected title was Fatal Planet. And I like that one too. Yeah, that's
I do like that one.
Yeah.
That one's, well, it was fatal.
Well, let's jump back to the black and white. This is one of my all-time favorites. This is our number 10, The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1957. I'm a fan because I'm a huge fan of Richard Matheson.
Yes.
And he's the writer of so many of these classic stories. We'll go over him a couple of times probably, but definitely one of my all-time favorite stories.
Yeah. That one I haven't seen in a long time, so it's that one's a harder for me to go back in time and remember. But I do have these memories of different scenes in that movie for sure.
Yeah, he fights the cat, right?
Yeah.
And there's the giant spider scene. You got to have that one, and it's kind of existential too. Like it ends with, I'm going to mess it up now, but it's some wording to the effect of, and mankind, even if it became tinier than an atom, I'm still worthy, and this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's always like, I mean, from my childhood, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and stuff like that, and that idea of suddenly being small and the fear that can be, all the things that are so little to us now and how dangerous they can be. So that one was. It's fun to play in that kind of realm.
Well, and this list actually had two, I think, which is the other one, of course, which was almost in its place, was The Amazing Colossal Man, which, was like this story, but in reverse, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you think being big would be good, but then it's like, take it too far.
Well, and I'm trying to remember that for the shrinking, he passed through the radioactive fog on a boat, or maybe that was the other guy. But in the 50s, it
was all radioactive.
Right, everything was radioactive, and at the end, it's always atomic particles in the end.
They are dealing with a very specific fear in the 50s. The Cold War and atomic radiation and nuclear fallout. So everything kind of. It's hard to find a movie at that time period that doesn't involve that in some way, except for the alien stuff, but then that still involves it as well.
Right. And you could probably make the point that these films are better scripted, in which I mean that the writing, they're a little bit more a thinking person's movie, especially as we get toward the top of this list. So some of them are a little silly, admittedly, but the science fiction of the 50s had that kind of humanitarian, self-reflective nature.
Yeah, they were coming off of a lot of trauma, so they were.
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And still, yeah.
Well, we have a great one for our number 9, and this is this character always crosses over because he's also a universal monster, and he tends to also make lists of the any kind of underwater creature. Of course, I'm talking about the number 9, Creature from the Black Lagoon. That's 1954. I take it you're a fan?
Oh yeah, I'm a fan. I mean, I have like just that whole like the meeting of the creature and all of that stuff. It, it just sticks in your head. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun in comics and wherever you find it. So yeah, I'm a
Yeah,
big
and
fan.
some people when they talk about the comics of the 50s and that age, they
Yeah.
sometimes, they say, you got the modern age, the silver age, and the golden age. In
Yeah.
between, I always say you have the atomic age. And that's one of those terms that didn't quite catch on. People don't really say atomic age. But the books from 50 to 56 have a certain kind of tone to them, I think. And
Yeah. Well, they
especially
say, I agree with you. I think they do say the atomic age is relating to the films. I don't know if they do with the comics though. Yeah.
do
But
they? Okay,
it
gotcha.
didn't catch on as much as the other ones though. I agree.
Right. And,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
used to be involved with like grading comics and this kind of thing with the company that I worked for. But, the
Yeah.
short version is the market always decides what the collectible one is and what the terms are going to be. So,
Oh, that's true. Yes.
we can try to influence it, but they always decide.
Yeah.
One of the great things about the creature from the Black Lagoon, we got to mention the makeup effects and the physical acting of the creature himself, who, man, he recently passed. That's kind of a bummer.
Oh no. Yeah.
But, talk about a memorable creature. I mean, here we are talking about it. It's 80 years later,
Yeah.
70 years later, whatever it is. So, great job by that makeup department and great job by the actor himself.
Yeah. And well, that's what I think I notice about a lot of the films is the sets and the costumes, and they get so creative because they didn't have as many tools in the kit, like didn't have as many visual
Yeah.
effects and everything. So some of the stuff, they, even if it's hokey, you're really impressed with like the way they set it up, the way they set the whole shot, a lot of creative shots, a lot of interesting costume and makeup work. And even if it doesn't look perfect, it's really enjoyable because you just know how much work it went into it to make it look somewhat realistic. So yeah,
Yeah.
and I think they do a really great job with the creature.
That's a good way to put it. Like, we forget now how innovative this must have been in the 1950s. There weren't CGI departments. And do you want to take this one, Jessica? What's your thoughts on practical effects versus CGI effects?
Well, I always love practical effects best, because if I'm a huge horror fan from all the decades, and then like obviously I got this guy behind me, but
Nice.
I even now I appreciate when a movie does more practical effects. Like the more they can do in camera, the more exciting and emotional the movie is. I think more visceral. Like the
Yeah,
more special effects, it just takes it,
it
even if
takes you out of it.
it takes you out of it, your eye, it's just the magic of the eye and film. And our eye and film like the practical more than the visual because it kind of goes with it, just works better, and I don't know, you feel more emotionally connected to the scene. If the creature is practical, you feel a little more scared, I think, a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
like it's there.
agreed.
I've yet to watch a visual effects monster that is more effective than the practical. I mean, even when you watch Alien, which is not 1950s, obviously.
Right. One of my favorites, though. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I watch it with my daughters and they make fun of some of it because they put the alien in there and they do a lot of strobe lights so that you don't notice any mistakes, but at
Right,
the same
right.
time, if it had been a visual effect, you wouldn't have been that scared, I don't think,
Sure.
in the same way. So yeah, I'm a huge practical. I'm like, anytime you can do anything in camera and make it practical, yes.
All right. Well, perfect, because that's going
Yeah.
to make a nice segue into our next question, which is the next on our list. It's number 7, Earth versus the flying saucers. Oh, I got them reversed. But
Wait,
these two, what they will have is Harryhausen special effects, by which I mean, the stop motion animation. So there's going to be 2 here. I'll jumble them I'll edit that part. But really,
okay.
what will be on here? You ready? It'll
Yeah.
be number 8, 20 million miles to Earth from 1957.
Okay.
So what I wanted to ask you was, are you a fan of the classic Harryhausen stop motion animation?
Yes. I'm
I,
very
I
much
could have
a fan.
guessed. I could have guessed by your, typically somebody there's a King Kong poster behind him.
I mean, I probably fell in love with black and white movies with the original King Kong. Like I watched it when I was 5 years old and I had a huge nightmare And I've watched it again and again and again throughout my life, and so I'm a huge fan of that stop motion. I still love to watch his stop motion.
Do you have a
Stop motion.
favorite? Do you have a favorite one?
Well, yes.
Okay, good one.
King Kong, yes, is my favorite one. What's your favorite one?
Out of all the stop motions, I'm a huge
Oh,
Jason and the Argonauts fan.
oh yeah, I just thought you meant him specifically. But
Yeah. Well, that's we could fall down that rabbit hole and talk about that
yeah,
the whole time. By the way, we'll make a mental note here. Great
yeah.
topic for the next list: Harryhausen films.
Yes, that's a good topic. And stop
Okay.
motion is a
Yeah,
great
yeah.
topic.
In general, because I'm a fan of that too, and I have been the whole time.
Yeah.
I,
And the
I have
skeletons in Jason. It's Jason the Argonauts have the skeletons, right?
right, and it has the
The little
the Trojan warrior guy,
Yep.
Talos, where they have
Yeah.
to there's like a valve on the back of his foot. That's how they
Yep.
defeat him.
It's so
Yeah,
great.
that's great stuff, man.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. I do love those skeletons have always been one of my top 5 for sure with the
Oh
stop
yeah.
motion.
Well, the 20 million miles to Earth, that's the one where they have the creature and it uses practical effects, but it's mostly the Harryhausen animation. And for example, they catch him and he's in like a little cage.
Yeah.
And they keep him like in the office or something when they first find him. But then of course he grows to this monstrous,
Yeah.
building wrecking size. And I look at those old effects and I think they hold up pretty well.
They do. It's just even like it's something about him. It's about the artistry that went into it, and what it took to do that. And or most people watching it have an idea of what it took to do that. And
it's like a craft.
Yeah. So it's always enjoyable. For sure.
That brings us to the next one, which I wanted to mention a couple of these iconic scenes. That's Earth versus the Flying Saucers. That's from 1956. And I chose this one because I think it is what most people remember when you say a classic 50s sci-fi film. And what I'm referring to, it has like these scenes where, classic flying saucers are crashing into the buildings in Washington, D.C. Like it's the Capitol building and I think the Washington Monuments in there, stuff like that. And they look very 50s and very iconic and very stop motion, which are, 3 of the great ingredients right there.
And then, I think it kind of sets up like, future movies, the way that you have, wanting to use those iconic settings and use the spaceship in those iconic settings and kind of threw down the gauntlet a little bit. Yeah. So
well, and they have been reimagined, some of these, as what we would call blockbuster films now. And the one about Earth versus the Flying Saucers, it's the one that is most similar to probably Independence Day.
Oh yeah, that is true. I
At
love
least,
it.
Yeah, you a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. It's like
I love that.
I'm a fan of that kind of thing.
Yeah. You had me at hello. When you talk about giant UFOs and cataclysmic scenes, I'm all over these movies.
And you just got one man who's going to solve it all, or one woman. I mean, either way.
Right. And Will Smith, man, great in that movie. He's been sort of odd lately. We'll leave that out, but I thought he did a terrific job in Independence Day.
Well, he's very good. Sorry, he's very good at convincing you he can solve the problem. So those are good movies for him, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And Jeff Goldblum, and he's good in everything.
Lose.
Yeah, he's good in
that. Can't lose. He is in everything.
So we love big name actors, and sometimes that's the key to unlocking some of these terrific scenes, right? For example, 1958. That's our number 6. It's a young Steve McQueen in The Blob.
Yeah, oh yeah. I love this movie so much.
I do too, man.
I love the remake of it. The idea of the Blob to me is, it was so terrifying. Even I remember what they're up in the Makeout Hill or whatever. Isn't that where they discover it?
Right.
And it's just so classic. And so, I mean, not at the time, I'd never seen anything like it. Obviously, I was a kid, and it's just such a strange concept, and that it could just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right. And a scary monster too. Like I can remember having nightmares from seeing this movie. It seems so real to me that a creature from outer space could absorb your
It comes shooting out of the movie theater. Yeah.
Right. And by the way, some of these, like I say, they hold up fairly well when you're talking about a movie that's 70 years old. The scripts are a little clunky, right? They talk a little funny, but
And
the premise is still original. Hey, what if something came back from space and it was a meteorite, right? Is how the
yeah, it
blob
was a
got there.
meteorite.
And there was a virus on it, and the virus infected this, and became this amorphous mass. I can remember having a nightmare about getting it on my arm.
Oh
And well,
God.
yeah,
That was from the remake is the one that gave me the biggest nightmare, because even though I like the original the best, well, I forget what year the remake of the Blob came out, but I just remember the guy who worked in the kitchen and he stuck his hand down the garbage disposal. And I was just like, why are you sticking your hand down the garbage disposal?
I remember. I
And
remember that.
and that part, that for some reason, that's the scariest. That's the one always caused me a lot of nightmares. But strangely enough, not to talk about my own stuff, but Plastic Girl, my whole series originally was this weird short story that was inspired by the Blob, because I was like thinking of those floating plastic, islands, out in the Pacific Ocean. And
Right.
I got so obsessed with it becoming like the Blob. It became more, it just gathered up more and more plastic. And as it went, it became sentient. And then once it realized it was like killing everything in the water, it got really angry. So then it started to like gather up all the garbage, and like it was going to come to, San Francisco and destroy I wanted to do my own blob basically. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
and then it turned into something different after I had kids, but that was the original story. And it was definitely very inspired by having watched that movie, and just the idea of something could just get, like, I feel like it represents a lot of our issues. Like all of our issues just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and especially with garbage these days. So
Right. And
it kind of,
by the way, I'm interested in hearing about that too, because one of the elements is that we reveal the things that were influences to our own work, and it's
yeah.
definitely the case with mine. And by the way, I thought it was gutsy that you took the category 50s classic sci-fi, because to me, I thought it was one of the cooler categories, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of lore and it's a huge subject.
It is a big subject. I got so, you get so sucked into it, and then you realize
Right.
you watched these movies so long ago. I was like, I can't watch all these movies over again before we talk about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And sometimes
So
you might see clips of them through various
yeah,
comedy shows or
yeah.
remakes of those kinds. There's a lot of that kind of thing for these types of movies.
And I definitely, the ones I watched a couple times, they definitely got into my psyche in a big way. That's what makes the 50s very interesting for horror, because
Right. The 50s had some of the best sci-fi horror.
sci-fi horror. They didn't have
Yeah.
they don't have like the scare you so bad you got to hide in your closet horror, but they get in it, you'll think about it years later, and just you're more heady, even when it's
Okay.
goofy.
I got the perfect example for you, Jessica.
Yeah.
This is one that when I saw it, it scared the pants off me, and I see it still today, and I think it's just as effective as it was then. This movie came out in 1958. It's our number 5, The Fly.
Oh God, The Fly. Help
Right?
me.
Oh my God, right? I was talking to, do you know Carissa Grant by any chance? She's a horror writer.
I know that name.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's doing well for herself. But
Yeah.
she had an interview, and we talked about it was the scariest monster reveals, and that
Ooh.
was on the list too, because again, it's so old, right? For one thing, but probably that haunting that's why we're still talking about it now.
I just, yeah, The Fly, the original Fly. I mean, I love Jeff Goldblum's Fly. Like that's amazing
Yeah,
movie.
it's
But
classic too.
the original one, I just, I don't know. I just love it so much. I love it. He starts as the doctor, and the fly effect is so goofy, but it just really got to me. I mean, it just got to me as this horrible idea of being mashed up with another animal, and not being able to undo it. And like the half and half is worse to me than the full transformation. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
The being part one thing and part the other, and being in this, you know, I don't know. The Fly's up there as top monster review. I have to go back and I want to listen to that one.
Yeah, even just those. And by the way, there's even a colorized version which is out, and it's on I think Amazon Prime right now
Oh, there's a
too.
colorized the of the old Fly.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan on the colorized, but I just happened to see it and it was The Fly. So I watched what I
Yeah.
was thinking was it was when I was doing this thing with Carissa. And my thought was, is this as scary as I remember? And it is.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
is. It definitely is. And it goes from, I think, Jessica, you said it best. What you got is in the beginning, excuse me, it's sort of toward the middle, the transformation where he's half man and half
Yeah.
fly. He has the arm and he can't write. And it's almost a little goofy, right? But
Hmm.
then it quickly turns tragic. Like
Yeah.
he's trying to kill himself, and the human head is trapped on the fly. It's
Yeah.
grim. Yeah, it's
It is.
really grim.
It's horrible. It is so horrible. Oh my God. I don't even know what that fear is. Is that radiation, I guess? Is that
I don't know, but like you mentioned that it was the psychological horror aspects are strong in the
Yeah.
1950s films.
Well,
Everybody remembers
it's
this
very
one.
true because when you talk about earlier movies, horror movies, or even the ones later, I don't think about them the same way as I think about these movies. Like, I think these little bits of ideas and what they were afraid of really got into my head, and then these little iconic scenes for sure. But yeah,
Yeah.
they were good at the iconic scenes.
The iconic scenes, and really that was one of the rules to get on the list also, is that when we talk about these, it's true for many of us that we haven't seen every movie that's on these lists, but
Hmm.
often we remember one or two or three classic scenes because they've been clipped or represented
Yeah.
elsewhere and that kind of thing. And the next one is definitely the same way. Ready for this? It's
Yeah.
1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
This one's
Classic.
actually my favorite, probably.
Let's develop this one a little bit. First, while
Oh
you're
yeah.
talking, I want to show the original movie poster, which is like sort of the striking image with the hand. So I'll leave that play while you're talking.
Okay. Well, I can't see it, but that's right.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's the
Okay.
classic poster.
Okay, got it. I mean, I love Invasion of the Body Snatchers so much because I just remember watching that movie and I think even it must have inspired lots of horror movies that came after it, and I can list like 4 or 5 in my head. But it's like seeing those pods and then the idea that the creature could take over your neighbor, your friend, and then
Right.
and just that slow takeover of the whole town and those two characters, and you're just like, you want them to get out so bad. And you think, and they just play it so great. You think, I don't want to spoil Invasion of the Body Snatchers
It's
for any,
okay. There's three
but
versions because I want to ask you
yeah.
about the 70s version then too.
Oh, am I talking about the wrong version?
No. Well, I'm there's three. Okay.
Okay, there's 3.
So
Yeah.
right now, in my opinion, the first one is probably the best one and the most innovative because it is essentially it's a kind of anti-communism
Yeah,
paranoia rant,
for
right? And
sure. Yeah.
at its core, okay. And then the second one is the scarier one, and that is Donald Sutherland and Jeff Goldblum.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking about the original one, but
Yeah. But
yeah.
I do want to hear what you think of the second one too. And then there's a third one, which I haven't seen. I think it's Nicole
I,
Kidman.
I don't. Oh, I did see Invasion of the Bodies, that one for sure. I wasn't a I wasn't a huge fan of that one, but the first one I'm so in love with. And I did watch the 1970s one, but I've only watched it one time, so I'm like having very vague memories of it. I've always just loved the black and white one, and
Yeah.
I loved what it was saying, and I watched it. I think it just was a formative time because I watched a lot of these movies like probably before I was 12 because I just watch them in
And
the
can I ask you, where did you see them? Was it like an after school channel or a
No, it's just I think on Sundays, Saturdays and Sundays um just on the TV, they would have like, different things presents. And I would watch a lot of the Twilight Zones. I would watch all these old movies, and whatever old movie would be on, I'd watch it with my dad, and so just over time, I think I just watched them. And then I did take a pulp fiction class, I think like freshman year in college. And I
oh,
just remember
nice.
every time we watched a movie or did a clip, I'm like, oh, I watched that. And the professor was like, no, you didn't. And I'm like, yes, I did.
Yeah,
But so it's very much just like, yeah, I didn't try to. That's just what I think my dad was a big creature movie person. And so if they were on, we were watching them. And so that was how it
yeah. When
happened.
I was a kid, we had like like an afternoon, it was Chiller Theater, or
Probably
Doctor,
something like
those, they had like a scary guy would come out and introduce them. And that was really my exposure, because there was not, most of these, they were already out of the movies, of course. And they were, at the time, I would say kind of more underground than they are now.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if it was like Elvira Presents, but I can't. I
Yeah,
don't,
maybe it was.
because I definitely watched Elvira Presents, and then there was like some Captain America guy, but those movies were usually a little newer. But yeah, I don't know. It was like some rule in my house, like afternoon horror wasn't real horror or something, right?
Well, we talked about some of the entries on the list are sort of like a thinking person's movie, and some are a little bit more toward the zany, but we love them anyway. And like the theme always is, these are things that we love, and we're just kind of gassing on about them, right?
Yeah.
Our number 3 is one of my all-time favorites. It's from 1954. It's the insect thriller, Them.
Yep.
I just love this movie, right?
I do too.
You can't go wrong with, and by the way, again, not the best special effects out of some of the ones on the list. This one is probably one of the more dated ones.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it's still giant spiders and a giant ant, which several of the giant ant scenes were practical.
And that's why we remember it. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's also a real thing, like coming at somebody. And I don't know, I've always liked the giant animal, even like, the giant creature in these old movies, and how they did it, and how they come after the people. And I don't know. Them is really good. I don't know, what's your favorite part of Them?
Well, I'm already predisposed toward, I like anything with giant monsters and giant robots. It's really, I'm actually that simple. But the thing that's kind of cool about Them, isn't that also an anti-atomic, remember most of your 50s movies tend to be some kind of anti-atomic message. And I'm pretty sure Them is too. Weren't they exposed? The eggs were exposed to the something or other.
Some kind of it's like some kind of radiation. Yeah, for sure. We should have made a list.
I know. And like, it's funny, I love to make the list, because it's like a rabbit hole that you fall down into, right? Because we technically could have had Godzilla on this list, because he was 1950 couple, right?
Yeah, and I adore Godzilla.
Yeah, how do you not love Godzilla?
But on the other hand, don't get me wrong, but
yeah, he's on so many other lists, though. That's why he got bumped for these. Like what you and I are doing, and I think this is awesome. It's kind of, we're kind of shining a light on some of the ones that maybe not everybody has seen, but for various different reasons, they're awesome. So, please listen to Jessica. Please listen to Tim. If you haven't seen these, we promise you they're really fun, and give them a watch.
And then just something else to bring up about was really interesting about some of the 1950s films, and like Them, and we talked about Creature from the Black Lagoon, and we're going to talk about 2 other movies that are on this list, but there's like 6 or 7 of these movies that there's always there's a woman scientist, or there's a woman member of the team who is struggling to be heard with these guys, like, and it's a very interesting thing, because I know, as I have watched a lot of sci-fi horror in the past, a lot of it, there is a lot of female empowerment, or at least watching a woman struggle with something you might be struggling with, like you have but I do appreciate how many of these movies have a female scientist or a female character who is maybe struggling again. I mean, the guys aren't always really respectful necessarily, but it's very realistic. She's struggling, but she's holding her own, and she's like, I'm going to be heard. And Them has, can't remember the doctor's name, but there's a female scientist in that. And I like that. I mean, that's a cool thing. I don't know if these guys.
I agree with you. And that's something too, we talk about the influences, and that's in the couple of my stories now. 3 of them, there's a female scientist that's the one. Yeah. Either A, fixing everything, or B, destroying the human race. So
exactly. I mean, we have a little. And there's always a character telling her she shouldn't be there. She has no business being in science. Why would you do that?
Right.
Yeah, but what's going on.
Well, let's move on to our number 2, because I know we were gently headed toward that. And this one's had a bunch of remakes also, so I really kind of want to get your opinion on the whole phenomenon.
Yeah.
That is The Thing from Another World. Of course, we're talking about the Howard Hawks version is the first one, the old one.
And now, yes. Now, I actually watched this one last night because
my gosh.
Yeah, because my husband had not seen it. And I said, because we're a huge Thing, John Carpenter fans. And I'm like, but you got to see the original Thing, because I knew it had been done very different. It was a very different monster, but I couldn't like remember every single detail. I mean, I remember the iconic scene of them going out and finding the spaceship. And
right. I'll put a graphic up for the
yeah,
viewers that haven't seen it. They walk out onto the ice and they're trying to get an idea how big this object is. And while they're standing there, the guy realizes and he says, "It's a circle." And you realize that it's a flying saucer. Yeah, it's a cool scene.
And they do a really cool thing where they all go around it to do the shape and put their arms out to indicate the scale. And that was a very practical effect. Like,
yeah, it's neat.
They couldn't really show a spaceship, so they were like, I liked how they played around with that.
Well, and he did another thing which was cool. And this is now I'm talking about Howard Hawks, who's the director, and I think that's what it is. Viewers, if I got it wrong, correct me.
Well, they have it has two directors.
Does it?
It has this other guy, Christian Nibby, is that how you say it?
I think Howard Hawks. I'm not familiar. Yeah,
it was like it's a Howard Hawks production, but they give another guy credit, and I think Howard Hawks probably directed it mostly. But yeah.
Well, the thing that he did that was allegedly, well, not controversial, but it was, inventive for the time. He had the actors interrupt each other's lines because that is the way people really talk. And nowadays, you and I go, look, of course it is. There was 100 movies like that, but not in 1952 or whatever it was. Like in those days, you said your line, and then the next person said their line, and it was more like it was like a radio play almost. But Howard Hawks said, no, I want you all jumping in, and you sound like you're afraid. And that was one of the first movies that did this.
And that's interesting because that's one thing we talked about last night is how many people they would have in a shot talking at each other and over each other. And it was like a really interesting setup, especially like if you're a director, you do film, it's like, it is a very interesting way it was shot and how he made the choices with the actors. And now that you say that, that's very true because the 1950s always has that, hey, what are you doing? Da, da, da. And they go back and forth and everyone's very not on top of each other.
Yeah, it's almost like, I don't want to say vaudeville. Right, there's a cadence to it. It feels like a Broadway play.
Yeah,
and look, not for nothing, they come by it honestly. That is what largely science fiction was like in those days, like Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits thing, and that's what you would see there. Not too far removed from a radio play.
And the thing I have to mention, just because I think I talked to you briefly about this, about how I kind of went down a rabbit hole trying to find female 1950s sci-fi directors and had a hard time finding them. And I knew I wouldn't find very many because I know a lot of the female directors. But Howard Hawks, like one of the female screenwriters of the time, Lee Brackett, who was a big sci-fi author, he didn't call her in on the thing, but he read her novel and he ended up he goes, get me that guy, Lee Brackett, thinking she was a guy, but she's a woman. And she ended up writing The Big Sleep or co-writing The Big Sleep. And then she actually wrote the first draft of The Empire Strikes Back years later. And
I thought I recognized this name.
Yeah, and then she died while she was writing Empire Strikes Back, and then Lawrence Kasdan came over. But I'm, in my little imagination, I'm like, what if she gave Howard some advice on the thing, Yeah. But I mean, she was but that was an interesting thing because she was writing she was writing novels and she was writing sci-fi stories and she was pretty accomplished in that. And then she was one of the only female screenwriters at that time working successfully, in the industry. So it was kind of interesting. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find a sci-fi. I hope someone corrects me. I had a hard time finding a sci-fi horror director other than Ida Lupino, which was more of a noir kind of show, like The Hitchhiker, which I haven't seen. So I am going to watch that this weekend. But
these are some cool links, and thanks for sharing.
I had to bring up the ladies,
Well, and listen, you got a valid point, and this actually came up. Travis Gibb and I were talking about this. That sometimes when you look across these lists, you'll see certain segments of society, and what do we see here? When 1950s sci-fi was a boys' club, a white boys' club, even.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. Let's be honest, it's not a very diverse.
Oh list. No, and finding African American director was harder even. So
Yeah, yeah, it
but
was
Ida did direct a Twilight Zone, so that, was something. She was the only woman who directed
oh,
a
good,
Twilight
good,
Zone.
okay. And
Yeah,
I
I
would
know.
say that's something that it has, the ship has corrected itself. Like there's lots of cool science fiction writers I
Yes.
admire that are women and directors too. Yeah.
And there were there were a lot of women sci-fi writers back in the 1950s. It's just they weren't getting a lot of as much work in film or credited work in film, but there was
Sure.
definitely working. So
Mm.
yeah, got a soft
Interesting.
subject.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And
Yeah.
we had talked earlier about, we make these lists, right? And it's always first hard to manage them because, like you said, pretty soon it balloons into this enormous animal because
Yeah.
there's so many films that we love and all the great things, the soundtracks and all, we could go on and on, right?
Yeah.
So on our list for that you and I were talking, they tended to be, this is just my opinion, we chose a little bit what some would call more intelligent movies. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that, they got a little bit of a tighter script, and some of them even have pretty strong messages or some kind of, you might even say it's preaching throughout. Number one is no exception. It's 1951, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah. That's pretty much one of my all-time favorite movies. It's so good. That one holds up. The remake I did not care for. I like to say that right away.
Yeah, yeah, the remake is rough.
But I mean, it's like when you love something so much, and then I'm not against remakes. I enjoy them and so I'll go watch them, and then I'll go, oh, it was not anything like the original movie. And I guess it was probably hard to be like the original movie, really, because they were trying to make a statement about how we were as a world, and
Right.
yeah, I mean, everything that movie says, I totally agree with, and it's nice to see it. And that's what,
Still relevant today.
yeah, it's just that you, and I love you guys need to change your behavior or we're going to have to destroy you. The rest of the universe is a little concerned about your behavior. You're too violent. You're creating too many dangerous weapons. You need to change. And the fact that we have people on the planet who will listen to that message, you've got your main character trying to, I forgot his name, who I can't believe it, who's trying to work with the alien and help him.
Well,
And then,
it's Michael Rennie was Klaatu. He was the actor that played him, and that
and then
was
Borg is, wait, who's the,
it's Gort is the robot.
yeah,
And that's,
yeah.
we talked about the iconic scenes, which I guess we just should mention. That's the
No,
other one that people tend to remember with they're thinking about classic 50s sci-fi, which it's
yes,
usually the ship with Gort coming out and,
yes.
or maybe even where they attack the army, which is one of the brief scenes there. Remember, he's giving a device which will allow him to understand all the languages, but he
Yeah.
pulls it out and it looks like a gun and they all
And then
shoot at
they shoot him,
Klaatu.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just kind of what I think of humanity. So I think that's why it works so well for me. I
Well,
mean,
and you have a good point because, the message, as you said earlier, is steeped in this 1950s communist paranoia. It was the
mhm,
Cold War was a real thing.
yeah.
It was, our current time, we forget that there was a time not that long ago when the kids were like hiding under their desks for missile drills. Like the fear of Russia and nuclear bombs in the 50s was something that was very real.
I would argue we're kind of back there in fearing the other.
Well, yeah, maybe,
Much.
maybe.
We're easily, with all the stuff happening, we've got these huge existential concerns going on when you talk about climate change, you talk about stuff with Russia and China, and you've got, in our country, mass shootings, which, aren't
There
the
was
same
just
as
one
nuclear war.
yesterday. Yeah.
I think the same kind of stress for our children at school. And the messages from these movies are not only like direct, they're dealing with, to me, what is more dangerous about humanity is what our fear makes us do, right? And that's what the Cold War and post Cold War is all about, and the fear of communism. Like our fear of something other than ourselves makes us monsters, makes us things that go after other people, that act violently first. Like even in The Thing, like they were right in the initial thing, because it's like it's a monster trying to eat them. But this guy's like, I'm gonna just shoot it and find out later. That was his his kind of,
Right.
and that backfires in The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah, sure did.
It's like, and so I just do like a movie that's about our own fear and what that brings
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
I think you gave a great answer, Jessica, and I think that you're
Thank you.
100% right, especially about the fiction of the time reflects the fear of the time, and I think you
Yeah.
definitely get it from those movies. Um, I can remember when I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still. You know, there's a little bit that, like you say, it's this timely message, and humanity, we have to clean up our act, and it's 100% true. And I like that they kind of went to a positive direction with it in The Day the Earth Stood Still. And there's a
Yeah.
message there that if you get the smartest people together, remember there was the guy with the
Yep.
chalkboard, and yeah, like, and you know, because look, the truth is I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
There's a chance I never will be at this point. But I guess, you know, I do know that if somebody is an expert in certain kinds of fields, we should probably be listening to a couple of these guys, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, the power of the people putting their heads together was kind of what saved the day in both the amazing 1951 version and
Hmm.
also the slightly crappy 2008 version or
So with the
2009,
same
whatever it
message.
was.
Yeah. The same message.
Which, by the way, I was surprised that that movie wasn't very good because it had Keanu Reeves in it, who I like him a lot.
I wanted to love that movie so bad, and maybe that's why it was just to me, because I think when I want to love something
Too
so
many
much that
preconceived notions
yeah, I was
exceeded
like,
your
Keanu, The Day the Earth Stood Still, nothing can go wrong, and then it just was flat. But hope he's not listening. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And you know, it's tough to live up to these classics.
Yeah,
And
for
it's like
sure.
you said, when we talk about even this subject, there's so many great ones. Like you wanted to mention, like the Roger Corman B movies.
Well, yeah, because when we talked about them, I should have brought it up then. I always have to go check because I have these iconic images of these crabs coming after people on a beach, and from a movie, and I was like, I always somehow associated that with them, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's this Roger Corman movie,
Yeah. Which one
and
is it? I know some of the Corman films too.
I'm trying to remember the name now because I think I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, but now
Was he the Food of the Gods guy? I don't know if he was.
I don't know. Well, Roger Corman notoriously did all these like very low budget movies,
Right.
and so he's an interest. I think there's a documentary about him that's really good that I watched a while back. So he's just an interesting guy in general. And I cannot remember the name of this crab. I think it's just the Attack of the Monstrous Crabs or
Oh,
something.
yeah. Attack of the Crab Monster. By the way, I think that was
Attack of the
some of these, like you probably notice I'm looking off screen a little bit. I do have the notes to make sure we, or at least to get pretty close to the right order.
Yeah. I mean,
But
I
I
just
also
like
have the ones that we struck out, and that was one of the almost Attack of the
the
Crab.
almost, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just actually wanted to bring up the B ones because I think usually when you're watching, I mean, it's a thin line here in the sci-fi horror
Yeah.
creature movies between B and A movie, but the B ones, like that one, I have very strong, vivid memories of those crabs, and I'm afraid to rewatch it because I really have fond memories of it. So I want to,
Yeah,
keep my fond memories, but
sure.
it's probably still good. I don't know.
Well, and the one thing we didn't mention, and it's true of all these movies, and
Yeah.
you know, we love to talk about the directing styles of the movies and
Mhm.
the cinematography, which is a very different experience in a black and white movie,
Yeah.
especially a black and white 50s sci-fi movie. Kind of almost like and some of them are sort of almost a German expressionist feel.
Yeah. Yeah. They do a lot of really cool stuff in these movies. And a lot of these directors, not a lot, but four or five of them went on to do, I mean, they didn't just do a horror sci-fi movie. They went on to do big movies, like I think Robert Wise, did he do Invasion or The Day the Earth Stood Still? Can't
Yes,
remember.
I think it was
Um,
Invasion.
I think he went on to do like The Sound of Music and like stuff
Oh,
like
that's
that.
right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. I do know what you're referring to.
Yeah, and so like and he did a Robert Wise actually also did a horror movie, The Haunting, that I loved. And that's like a Shirley Jackson short story. And then if you just watch how these things have gotten remade through time, and then like the house on what is it? The house on haunted, the Hill House. What's it called? The
The
Haunting
house.
on the TV show. I'm spitting it out all wrong. The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House.
Yep. I know which one you
Yeah,
mean.
and that's also Shirley Jackson's story, but I mean, the original movie was The Haunting, and then
Right, there was two movies of that.
that they remade that movie, and
Yeah.
that was a favorite old horror movie of mine. And then in my adult life, God, that first season of that TV show was just horrifying. So good. And so like I like to watch the kind of the um how these directors kind of they got to dabble in lots of genres, you
Right.
know.
Yeah, really
Some
a broad palette.
Yeah, and sometimes a lot of directors get kind of pigeonholed, but it didn't seem to kind of take back then. You just got to do a bunch of different stuff.
Hmm.
I don't know. Anyways, but
Yeah, it's interesting. But Jessica, I want to say thank you for taking part in our list. This was a really great one.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, I love these movies, and especially to anybody that's watching, if you're not sure, man, highly recommended. Go and check some of them out.
Hmm.
But before we go, let's find out a little bit more about what Jessica's up to. I mean, and I know you just got back from the convention. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, we were at WonderCon. I had a pretty good time. I got to launch my um well, I had a Kickstarter for Mary Shelley's School for Monsters, the origin comic, which is kind of a and so I sent all my Kickstarter rewards out and then got to bring the comic to WonderCon because I'm only going to have it at conventions for that comic. And it was pretty well received by pretty much everybody who looked at it, got their hands on it. So that was great. I got to hang out with two of my buddies I really like. We boothed together, so that was nice. And did a panel, and we had a really good time.
What was the panel?
It's called C2C, which is Concept to Creation. My friend puts it together, and it's usually a panel of writers from a bunch of different mediums between comics, books, and screenwriting. And we had an editor this last time, and we just basically do a kind of intro of everybody, and then people bring their questions, like other writers who are stuck, just ask us questions. And so it's really like free form, but fun and different. I've done it twice now. It's pretty fun. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, so we had a pretty successful panel, and the cons are fun. They're exhausting,
It's a lot of
but
work.
yeah, what? It's a lot
A
of
lot of
work.
work. Yeah, a lot of work.
A lot of talking all day to people. And selling, low-key selling. So
Yeah. How about,
we
can
had
I ask you, how did you get your start in writing and creating?
um I guess my first start was out in Hollywood because I came out to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter, and I worked a couple jobs, and I had a writing partner. Her name's Kim Pierce. And we wrote, strangely enough, a campy creature movie called Deep Thirst about
Oh,
man-eating
nice.
plants in Joshua Tree. And it was kind of a Thelma and Louise meets Tremors. So I'm true to my word that the 1950s creature movies inspired me.
Yeah. Wow.
And well, we wanted to kind of have two women who were going out on a vision quest, get out to Joshua Tree, which I was born out there, go out to Joshua Tree and come into some man-eating plants because there's this horrible drought going on, and make these fun creatures. And then they had to find out what they're really made of. It was kind of a true vision quest, with blood and guts all over, lots of kills. And so that got us our agent and tons of our first meetings. And then we kept doing spec scripts, pitching animation. So that was my beginning of the writing thing. So yeah.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
I saw your new book. It looks terrific. I'm one of the backers, and I wanted to congratulate you on your successful Kickstarter.
Thank you. And I'm very excited. The hardcover, I just got pictures from the printer. So the hardcover graphic novel that's coming out in July looks all 1,000 copies of it look beautiful, at least from what I could tell. So I'm excited about that. They're coming my way. So and then the author, the artist and I, Anna Weischeck, are working on the second book. So
Okay, perfect.
yeah,
Perfect.
we're still, yeah,
Well, we
good.
will look forward to that. Also, could you tell our viewers what is the easiest way to find you?
I think the easiest way to find me is wickedtreepress.com, and to subscribe to my newsletter. I am on Facebook and Instagram as Wicked Tree Press as well. I prefer the newsletter because you get more information, but please follow me in any way that you would like to.
Awesome. Well, for those so inclined to follow Jessica, I will put the links in the comments. And in closing, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. This was a great one, man. I think I will look back on this one with fondness. Got a special place in my heart for 50s sci-fi.
Nice. Me too.
If you
Thanks for
guys
having
want to, oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'll just give myself a quick plug. If you want to follow my upcoming book, that's going to be launching April 4th on Kickstarter. That is titled Call of the Cryptid, and it'll be full of monsters. So I hope you'll come check it out. Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, thank you. And I am going to check that out because I love cryptids.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch.
Yeah. Okay.
Viewers, thanks for tuning in. This is an episode of Holden's 11. We'll look for you next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night.